A very warm welcome to the World of Lord Russell podcast talk show. And today's show is You Are the Ref, which captures the life of an internationally recognised English Football Premier League referee. He is counted amongst the top 100 referees of all time in a list maintained by the International Federation of Football History and Statistics. He stepped up to the ultimate honour, domestic honour in 1981, for doing refereeing the 1981 FA Cup final at Wembley between Spurs and Manchester City, including the subsequent replay, which was also played at Wembley. Internationally, he was a match official at the 1988 European Championships, in which he took control of West Germany's 1-1 draw against Italy in Group A at the Rheinstadion. He also officiated at the 1988 Olympic football tournament, handling the semi-final between Brazil and West Germany, which Brazil won on penalties following a 1-1 draw. Yes, folks, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome on the show Keith Hackett. Welcome to the show, Keith.
Delighted to be on.
Oh, it's
looking forward to the chat.
Yes, likewise as well. You've got an interesting history. So, as always, we'll start from the beginning and we'll jump around a little bit, I'm sure. But What a show we've got here, Keith. You began refereeing in local leagues, actually, in and around the Sheffield, North Yorkshire area in 1960. So, Keith, please let us know about how you started. And, of course, what was your inspiration to become a football referee?
Well, there wasn't one. The reality was that I was playing local football, grassroots football, and at that time, the county FA decided that ideally, to improve the standards of player behaviour, one member of each team would participate in a referees course. Wow. And I was the guy that was pushed forward to do that, and spent 6 weeks, 3 evenings, if you like, a week, being taught not just the laws as they were written, but the practical aspects. A really good course. Passed the examination, became a qualified referee with no intentions of refereeing.
Wow.
And then what happened was there was a Saturday that I had off from playing, excuse me, and I got a phone call that week from the county FA, and it was, you're being appointed to referee Hillsborough Boys Club against Sheffield United Juniors, Saturday, Cadman Road. That was it. Wow. They put the phone down. I had no opportunity to say I don't want to do it. Excuse me. At the time, I had no kit. So I borrowed the kit, purchased the whistle, went out and refereed the game at Intake School, certainly not a flat pitch, and was praised afterwards by the manager of Sheffield United Juniors, who said I should take it up more seriously. Oh. And I took his advice. And then the difference was that as a player, you might be involved 3 or 4 minutes of actual kicking the ball, but in refereeing, you're there for the full 90 minutes, no switch off, and a little bit more if you're playing extra time. Yeah, and I was thoroughly enjoying it. And that was it.
Incredible. That's, I mean, total concentration for 90 plus minutes. I mean, that's an amazing start. I mean, you reached the Northern Premier League and became a Football League linesman, I believe, in 1972. And just 3 years later, you advanced to the supplementary list of referees. And 1 year later, in 1976, the full list at the age of only 32. So a very young referee. This is some meteoric rise, Keith, really, which is incredible in its own right. So how does a young referee rise through the ranks so quickly? And what are the key foundations that enabled you to succeed? Obviously, you were a good referee, but you have to catch someone's eye at some time, don't you, at some point?
Yeah, I think that I took the view that I wanted the players to respect me and I wanted to earn their respect.
Yes.
And Sheffield had a very competitive structure within the Saturday game, and certainly Sunday League football contained a number of semi-professional players. So they gave you those challenges, and it was on those challenges and that experience that you gained that you advanced, because you only had the club marks that were submitted to the various leagues and then the county FA, and then the decisions were made. So, having said I was one of the quickest, and I think I was, but that was still a 12-year plus
Yes.
apprenticeship. You know, and someone like Michael Oliver now, I noticed on his records, I think he had 8 years at grassroots level. So it's even accelerated now, and Michael has obviously become one of our top referees, if not the top referee,
Yes, indeed.
going through a similar process, but a little bit quicker.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do remember you on the field. You were quite fast on your toes, I have to say. You were quite a quick runner. Did you run at all when you were a younger man, athletics or participate in 100 meters? I know I did, but did you do anything like that?
No, I trained on a local football field. Um, I quickly recognised that if you didn't see an incident, you couldn't respond to it.
Yes.
You did, on those occasions when the wrong calls were made or a decision wasn't made at all,
Mm,
I recognised that it was generally through being in the wrong position, and therefore, when I can now look back and say, well, the referee process of decision making is to see, recognise, think, and act. I quickly understood that the need for speed was important,
yes.
and and also the ability from day one that if I could play an advantage, I would apply it. If I could keep the game flowing,
Yes.
those early years on the Sunday League with challenging players,
Mm,
the idea was to keep out of it and let them play. And one of the ways you can do that is play an advantage. And I must say that I developed this skill set that said, if in doubt, play advantage, and nobody will question the decision.
absolutely right, Keith.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. And quite well done, too. And of course, you continue to make progress. And in 1979, you were rewarded by the FA as senior linesman to Ron Chalice, of course, in the FA Cup final. This final is often referred to as the 5-minute final.
Yes.
Please tell us more about this experience, Keith, and of course, the 1979 Cup final itself as senior linesman, the 5-minute Cup final. I do remember that.
Well, I think there's a game before that that for me was perhaps more important, and that was um, Liverpool versus Arsenal in a semi-final at Hillsborough.
Yes.
I'm a Sheffield Wednesday fan at that stage, and at the weekends, my father used to take me to the game. We'd walk from where I lived about 3 miles to the stadium, stopping at the pub on the way.
Of
I'd have an
course.
orange juice. My dad, as steelworker, probably 3 or 4 pints.
Yes.
And then we get to Hillsborough, and it was usually a fairly good crowd. And I would abseil down the uh, crowd to the front. So in '79, when the semi-final was appointed, I was appointed to that, and it was going to be played at Hillsborough. I took my car, parked it up at Park Springs, where I used to live, and walked the 3 miles to the ground. So
Yes.
for me, refereeing at Hillsborough was massive. I'd been the other side of the fence, and now here I was out
On
in the
the
middle,
on the pitch.
and
Yes.
and gobsmacked that it had arrived so early. The cup final is obviously something that you have an ambition to do, but you never realise um, the history. But once you're involved in it, the earlier rounds of an FA Cup, it is the cup competition, and therefore um, to get appointed to that game meant that you travel down on the Friday morning. You stay in a nice hotel. Obviously, Ron Chalice was a warm and welcoming guy,
Yes.
and a very good referee. And I just followed him really out in the middle. What I remember most about that game, and yes, it was the 5-minute cup final, was the very fact of giving a very strong throw-in signal. And because the hands were a bit sweaty, the flag departed and it flew down the line. And embarrassingly, I inched towards it, picked it up, and was totally embarrassed. But it's overlooked. But it's something that does happen. This is what happens in games. You have to
Yes.
get over those problems,
You
and
certainly do.
that for me was my own personal encounter. I thought Ron Chalice had a super game.
Yeah, he did.
And he was very warm and very thankful afterwards. And we went that evening for dinner with our wives, and yeah, it was a good event. Really nice time.
Absolutely. And of course, in the FA Cup final, as we all know, it's not just broadcast live on across the whole of the UK, it's broadcast live globally across the world.
Mm,
And to
mm.
make those little instances of throwing the flag, obviously not on purpose, that's going to be picked up and seen by everybody. So yeah, it's a bit nerve-wracking, a bit nervous, isn't it? Really, Keith? To be fair, but
Yeah,
good fun
and
nonetheless.
at the same time, you have to recognise I was a referee, and
Absolutely.
so you weren't running the line regularly. And this is what happened. This was what
Mm.
used to happen. They put a referee on one line in the same way they do that when you went out in Europe. But the reality is, we did that job. But perhaps in hindsight,
Yeah.
and now I can look back in some time, we weren't as good at running the line as those people that were those assistants or linesmen at the time were doing the job week in, week out.
That's a fair comment, to be fair. That's a very fair comment. And then 2 seasons later, you stepped up to the ultimate domestic honour, of course, of match referee for the 1981 FA Cup final at Wembley, finishing 1-1 between Spurs and Manchester City. Aged only 36 at the time, so you were one of the youngest cup final referees. You also took charge of the replay, also at Wembley, the game ending 3-2 to Tottenham. And of course, that sensational winning goal by Ricardo Villa, with that mesmerised slalom run that has woven its way into English football folklore these days, of course. And
Mm.
what an FA Cup final to referee, Keith. I mean, what are your memories of those two matches?
How quickly they passed.
Ah,
The first game, um, being told just as we were going out onto the pitch, guys, I need to know whether you've got a decision to make. Do you want a £35 match fee or a medal? The medal was obviously the thing that you wanted.
mm,
Um, Going out and officiating the game, and it is an occasion. It's an event. It's probably the biggest event in refereeing at that particular stage. And
yes.
I was very fortunate. I mean, the players wanted to get on. It was a tough game. The first game um, ended with Tommy Hutchinson scoring both goals.
He did. He did.
And I can remember walking up the steps thinking, well, if I received a medal, I'm not going to get the replay because nobody had informed me about a replay. And of course, as I walked down the steps, got back onto the pitch, Reg Payne, who was the referees guy at the time, said of the FA, and he said, look, you've got the replay Thursday.
Wow.
And so the first game I remember, when the two games had finished, the one thing that struck me was this, and it epitomizes football and the highs and lows of football. In that first game, Ricky Villa, perhaps of Spurs, didn't have his best game, and he was substituted. And I can remember him walking around the perimeter of the field with a sort of exit at one end of the Wembley, dejected.
Oh dear.
And then, of course, excuse me, in the second game, um, doing that run and scoring that wonderful goal. And of course, one of the other things in that final was a lot of people failed to recognise Manchester City's Mackenzie, who also scored an absolute blunderbuss of a goal, a
Yes.
perler. And that's forgotten because obviously, you know, the atmosphere in a night match, in any night match, is usually much better than in during the day. And this played on a Thursday night in a reduced crowd, of course. I think it went from 100,000 down to 91,000.
Mm.
Still noisy, and the players really got on with it. I mean, I can remember having to intervene very quickly with Manchester City's uh, Jerry Gow, who's wanting to track our dealers and probably make certain he's not a playmaker. I quickly grabbed that with a bit of luck and carded Jerry Gow, and that quietened him down for the rest of the match. So yeah, it was a game that I look back on with great joy.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, our mutual friend Paul Miller played for Spurs in both those games,
Yes.
and Paul was on this show actually in the summer this year. What a great player, and in what was a great Spurs side at the time, wasn't it? And I've said before, arguably, probably better than the '61 Spurs team, really. In retrospect, I thought they had a great side, didn't they? With the two
Yeah.
Argentinians
Yeah.
blending those players they had. What a great Spurs side! They should have done a lot more, I guess, really, but they did okay, didn't they, for that time in the early '80s?
Yeah, I think they were a good game, a good team. There's no question when you look at Ardiles and the way he could play, Glenn
Oh yes,
Hoddle, Miller, Steve Perryman, an absolute joy to work with on the field as a captain, open to conversation, and generally both teams, in fairness, wanted to get on with the game,
yes, always.
and that was great credit to them. And they, I think on the day there was really no losers because I think the game benefited enormously by the actions of both sets of teams going out full thrust to try and win, um, and uh, and that winning goal.
Absolutely, and not forgetting, of course, the great officiating as well by yourself and the linesman. You all did a great job that day, I seem to remember. So it's a good all-round cup final, wasn't it? One to remember
Mm,
in retrospect. A very good cup
yeah,
final. So that's great, really. And of course, Keith, the following season in 1981-82, you were appointed to the FIFA list. So now officially a FIFA international referee. You must have felt on top of the world, Keith, at this point, because you're motoring through the realms of a top-class referee. It's fantastic, isn't it?
yeah. I think I was getting the appointments. Regular appointments help. The games are challenging. It keeps you on your mettle. I used to do, people at that time, remember, we were amateurs in a professional game. So
Definitely.
not only was refereeing going quite nicely, my own career, moving from sales to sales manager to eventually sales and marketing director,
Mm,
we're moving in a good situation. Um, Being on FIFA and UEFA meant that time off work became the issue. But we'll go on and explain that in more detail. But prior to that, having got the FIFA badge, I was then invited to referee on the North American Soccer League for a period of 6 weeks, and that in itself was a great learning curve because all of a sudden I was actually officiating almost every day,
mm,
3 games a week, international players in past and present in the North American Soccer League, and
of course.
then understanding what an event was and the sort of interference, if you like, of television, meeting their obligations in terms of times of kickoff, etc. Um, Coming across difficult players,
Mm,
Scuderian, um, and people like Giorgio Canaglia, who was the centre forward for New York Cosmos. But one story that I remember was I was scheduled to referee New York Cosmos against Vancouver Whitecaps, and there was a blockage in the tunnel on the way to Giants Stadium, and we were sat there parked, and I was beginning to worry about the amount of time it was taking. The movement of cars was very slow,
mm.
and the driver suddenly got out the car and ran and shouted, and I thought, "Cracky, what's going off here?" And then he brought alongside him and opened the door, and a guy piled in, and I looked through the mirror, and there was Carlos Alberto, the Brazilian captain and
Oh, wow.
captain of New York Cosmos. So uh,
What a player.
I thought that about 400 or 500 yards before I got to Giant Stadium, I stopped the car and said, "Look, I need to get out and walk. I don't think it would be appropriate for me to arrive at Giant Stadium um, with the captain of the home team." But those are lots of things that were great memories in terms of the North American Soccer League.
Absolutely. And I think you've made a very poignant statement there as well, because going back in the day, you were, as referee, as linesman, all literally amateurs. You weren't
Yes.
professional status. You didn't get the wages that professionals would get paid today, of course. And
No.
you were offered either £35 or a medal for refereeing the FA Cup final. I mean, that is some statement, isn't it? That's some reality check for people. And people listening to this show probably need to understand that, how difficult it was in those days, the referee status. I think you probably got paid your travelling costs, but £35 to referee an FA Cup final, that is just unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of people don't realise the sacrifices that you have made in refereeing,
Correct.
and this applies generally to all referees.
I agree.
And one of the reasons why I promoted the idea of professional refereeing. But
Yes.
the reality is the sort of things that come to mind was being appointed to referee New Zealand versus Australia in a World Cup game,
Mm.
which meant 5 days off work.
5 days, no money.
And the outcome of that was a loss of employment.
Mm.
So that was one sort of problem. This whole question of mixing business profession that pays the mortgage and referee.
Yes.
And I mean, I can remember. I mean, ultimately in my career, I had to refuse the officiating the final of the European Cup because I couldn't get time off.
Yes, it's sad, isn't it?
And then the other time was officiating Stuttgart versus Feyenoord. And the only way I could get back in time for a board meeting was to charter my own aircraft. That cost me two grand.
So it's costing you
So
money actually to referee
yeah,
rather than make anything. I mean, it's
absolutely. Yeah,
incredible.
yeah, yeah.
And I think that's a thing that people, supporters need to understand. Going back in the day, obviously supporters were passionate about their side. They'd give the referee and the linesman, in those days linesmen, now of course referees as well, a lot of abuse. And if they really knew that you're doing it for fun, you weren't getting paid an awful lot of money, it was really an amateur status, maybe they'd have been a little bit kinder, or maybe not. I don't know. Passion in football's
Yeah,
hard.
I think. Look, I wouldn't have it any different. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, passion is part of our love for football.
It
We're all
is.
passionate. Referees are as passionate as fans.
I'm sure you
You
are.
know.
Yes. I quite agree completely, Keith. And then the FA that appointed you as the match referee to the 1984 Charity Shield match, in which Everton defeated Liverpool 1-0. And bizarrely, of course, courtesy of a Bruce Grobbelaar, our own goal. I do remember that. It's quite bizarre. And in 1986, you refereed the League Cup final where Oxford United beat QPR 3-0. Wembley was becoming your second home almost in a way. What do you remember about those two matches? I know Oxford United, it's their first and only ever real trophy, isn't it? To beat QPR 3-0.
Yeah, the interesting bit there was the manager had been at both clubs, Jim Smith. Jim
Yes.
Smith had been Oxford's manager and had moved to QPR. And I'd come across Jim Smith, a Sheffield-born guy,
Yes, he was.
early in my career when I officiated on the Northern Premier League. He was manager, in fact, player manager at Boston United, where, interestingly, on the left wing was Howard Wilkinson, who eventually became manager of Leeds United, who were very successful in winning the Premier League.
And I
So,
believe Sheffield Wednesday, your club as well. Wasn't he manager there?
absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely. So, in a way, you were growing up alongside these guys, and I think going into that game, I think the general view was that this was going to be an easy match for QPR. Smith, having moved from Oxford, knew all the background of Oxford United players, etc. But Oxford were the winners and
They were.
deserved winners of the tournament. And of course, I'm sure it goes down in their folklore as one of the games. I mean, the sort of post-match celebrations of fans as I was going to the car that was going to take me back to the hotel was terrific.
Yeah, absolutely. And is it right to say that Oxford United were actually third division, the old third division in those days? I think they were,
Yeah.
weren't they?
Yes.
To beat QPR was an outstanding result, a bit like Swindon beating Arsenal going back in the day as well in the League Cup final.
Yeah.
So you do get those results from time to time. It's the magic of football, doesn't it, really?
Absolutely.
Wish we could see more of it, I really do. And internationally, of course, you were named as a match official at the 1988 European Championships, Keith, in which you took control of West Germany's 1-1 draw with Italy in Group A at the Rheinstadion. Lovely stadium that is too. A huge match to officiate at the European Championships. So how was the transition from refereeing top-flight English football to the international stage? And were you still an amateur then? Were you still having to pay for your travel and hotels? And
we got effectively travel expenses.
Yes.
But that wasn't much because the flights were already booked and paid for, as the hotel was, by UEFA.
Oh,
so
wow.
the governing body did that. All you did literally was turn up to the stadium, ideally with your kit, and then travel. This was unlike the European Championships now, where the team of referees, match officials go out, stay there, hotel, do the training, have the meetings, etc. Ours was basically arrive one day before the game, and then the game is over, and you leave the following morning. So that's the change. I suppose then the finances and the funding wasn't there, but we played a part. I mean, the game itself, you recognise it is an event because you've got all the scenarios of the pre-match build-up and the pre-match entertainment and all that goes with it.
Of course, there must be some adrenaline as well that you go through. Real hype.
Yeah, and there was, of course, again a bit of a controversial incident because Italy took the lead. Volta again. We'd had the four-step law come in. I was informed very clearly by UEFA representative at the game that they wanted me to enforce that. I explained that to both managers in the team exchange and said very clearly, look, I've been advised. I've got to tell you, in the first half, Zenga was carrying beyond 4. It would have been, I think, wrong. I sort of went towards him to indicate. I'm not so sure he got the message fully. But half time, I took time out to actually make certain that the manager of Italy was aware that Zenga was coming close. And of course, in the second half, Zenga took his 5th, 6th step, and I was left with no option to penalise. And from that, Germany equalised. So it's these sort of things that you try and apply common sense. You don't sort of go out just to apply the law. You're communicating all the time.
And of course, you did take the option there of going up to the Italian manager at the time and letting him know that was the case, so he could educate his players. So it's not just a rash decision, is it? It's something you've been educating and advising at the higher level. So quite rightly so. I don't think a lot of people really understand that in football. Go watch football, but there is a lot of that goes on. We hear about referees going near to the opposing or one of the managers or opposing teams' dressing room, and they think, oh, that's cheating. But maybe you're going in to do some advice, just to say, look.
Yeah, I tended to do everything. I certainly would refrain from recommending anybody goes into a team's changing room.
Happen, though, doesn't it?
I would. On this occasion, I caught the manager in the tunnel.
Yes.
Well before the restart of the second half, and therefore got the message across. And in fairness to him, I saw him move down the line and talk to Zenga. So I think those things are part of the importance of a referee. I always took the line, and I prefer referees who are proactive and not reactive, because reactive is followed a higher level of cards and a lack of communication. Communication is for me the art of refereeing, the ability to be able to prevent and the step process that when I'm coaching referees, I talk about the quiet word. You don't have to make it public. Run alongside the player. Try and create a relationship, not over chat, but say, hey, I want an improvement in your behaviour. Maybe then it becomes a public response, call the captain across and have a chat. And then when you issue a yellow card, and some yellow cards are mandatory, you can't go through that process. But when you do that, I think you feel that I certainly felt that I've done my job. He's not listened, and therefore I've now got to act in the appropriate manner.
Yeah, you give them the warning. And of course,
Yeah.
it's preventative, as you say. You're given the prevention task. And if they don't take that advice, then out comes the yellow, or indeed the red, whatever it
And I
is.
think I think generally in my era, uh, look, the games were tough.
They were.
There was the physical challenges for sure.
Mm.
And 1970, before I got on the list, there'd been this massive clampdown, particularly on challenges from behind. So, in a way, we were working with the players rather than conflict. And
Yes.
generally, players were behaving well. They gave you respect. They may not have agreed with the decision, but generally, they gave you respect.
And afterwards, they would have reflected on it, of course, and thought, you know what, that referee was correct. I didn't do what I was asked to do. I was, out of order in that particular instance. So then, therefore, respect comes from that as well, doesn't it, Keith?
Yeah.
But players will always argue, won't they? They never want to get the yellow or the red or decision against them.
Yeah. I mean, look, the one thing I'd say about refereeing at the highest level is you're a part spectator viewing from the best seat in the stand and watching these wonderful players with their skill sets.
Oh, wow.
And we see that increasing skill levels now in the Premier League.
Definitely.
And it's great. It's great that, the fans don't come to pay and watch the referee.
No.
The best referees are the ones that are not seen, really, and just get on with the game. All too often, that's very difficult now in the modern game with the increased number of televisions, the cameras that watch every move that the referee makes.
Absolutely. You're under the microscope all the time, aren't they? Well, referees now these days under the microscope, which is a shame. We'll come on to some more of that a bit later on. We start to talk about your favourite subject, VAR, and I think everybody's. We'll come on to that a bit later on. But before so, of course, you also officiated at the 1988 Olympic football tournament. So really an Olympian too, if you like, really, handling the semi-final between Brazil and West Germany, which Brazil won on penalties following a 1-1 scoreline after extra time. I mean, must have been a great experience too, Keith. And what are your memories of that particular game and becoming, of course, an Olympian?
Well, I think that the thing I remember most, first of all, football to some degree was new to Korea. They'd obviously had the South Korean team in the '66 World Cup.
They did.
We were clear in watching those, but I think for the general fans, getting to football matches was somewhat difficult. In fairness, I think the Olympic Games opened up the fan base and certainly helped to project South Korea as a country and as a nation. So my memories are terrific. First of all, working with a group of international referees from around the world. I still communicate with a couple of them. Ed Bellion from America, a guy who was born in Liverpool but was a professor at the Texas University on mathematics, and a guy called Chris Bainbridge, who was the Australian representative, who actually was born in Kettering. So we had this great affinity, the thing is, they gave you a card which allowed you to go into any sport. So I can remember watching boxing and Roy Jones being cheated out of what was a clear win, and everybody being amazed, and the stadium falling silent when, apart from American journalists who were voicing their disdain at everybody who'd marked the match, watching Daley Thompson break the pole.
Absolutely.
Sitting with the media and watching that 100-meter Olympic final when the Canadian runner broke through the line, and then everybody was shocked by the time that they saw, which was a world record. And then all of a sudden, the journalist disappearing because the noise was beginning to break that it failed a quick drug test. And so, in that sense, he was sent home. But for my personal view was that the indication I'd received was that I was going to referee the final, and I was told to prepare for the final. And then Brazil and Germany came together in the semi-final, and a colleague of mine from Mexico City, a referee, Marco Durantes, whose father-in-law was on the referees committee at FIFA, rang and said, Keith, I've got some news for you that you might not want to hear. I know that there's a belief that you're going to referee the final, but I'm now going to tell you that you're going to do the Brazil West Germany game because Havelange, the president, wants you to do that. And that's how it finished up. So when I was told that by Sepp Blatter that this was the game I was going to officiate, the only thing I said was, would it be in the main stadium and would it be under the torch? And it was, and it was a super game. I mean, Brazil. I was aware of Brazil and Germany with a similar philosophy, and that is starting off with the players at a very young age and then walking them effectively through all the levels of tournaments
Yes.
till eventually they represent the country at the final. Obviously, some players drop off, but the nucleus of that team is how it develops. So they were experienced players. They were good team players. It was a fairly fast end-to-end game,
Mm.
very enjoyable. Obviously, Mexico City, where we're at altitude. So as a referee, physically, you're mindful that you might go to extra time, and it's going to be a test on your fitness, or
Yes.
even though you've prepared. So you're measuring the distances that you're on, but it was enjoyable. And penalty kicks is, for a referee, you see the winning team go off and celebrate. The feeling of the team that's lost is immense.
Oh,
And of course, uh, I have sympathy with the player who misses that penalty kick because everything, the world comes to an end as far as that player's concerned. And when we see penalty kicks now, even the modern game,
yes.
the suffering of that individual, it probably never leaves them.
It probably doesn't. And of course, as Englishmen, we're more aware of it with the England
Yeah,
national side, of course, forever bowling out in major tournaments on penalties, be it Euros or the World Cup.
yeah,
It's just a constant, it's a cycle for us, isn't it? We're used to it.
yeah,
We're used to disappointment. But yeah,
for sure.
it must be terrible to be on the losing side. As a player, it must be absolutely dreadful. Absolutely
Yeah,
dreadful.
yeah,
But everybody gets over it eventually, move on. Gareth Southgate missed that awful penalty, didn't he, against Germany in the 1996 Euro tournament against Germany. And there he is as England manager coach. So, you do move on, you learn from your
yeah,
mistakes
for
and
sure.
hopefully teach the players to be better at penalty kicks. But we don't seem to get it right, do we, England?
No, no.
Perennial failure for some reason. But let's step back a little. You were an official Football League referee from 1976 to 1992. And then, of course, moving to an official Premier League referee from 1992 through to 1994 when you retired. But we'll talk more about your retirement, Keith, a little later in the show. So as a Football League and Premier League referee, what do you remember most? What matches gave you the most memories to last a lifetime? I can think of one, which I'll come on to shortly, but I'm sure there's others.
Well, I think there were many. I think there were many. In a way, I've been very fortunate. I can remember in those early years, Lincoln City versus Peterborough United.
Yes.
Um, and I officiated that game. It was covered by Yorkshire Television with John Helm, the reporter, and the manager of Lincoln was Gordon Taylor, Graham
Oh,
Taylor,
well,
sorry, not
Graham
Gordon,
Taylor.
Graham.
Yes.
And I had little contact with him, just the team sheet exchange prior to the game, um, and the game went. I mean, Lincoln won fairly comfortably, and it was a very enjoyable occasion.
Mm.
And I remember several days later receiving a phone call from Graham Taylor, and he said, "I've allowed you to calm down. I've allowed the game to go out of my mind." I'm thinking, "Oh, here it comes. He's going to have a go," and he
Yeah.
was extremely complimentary.
Oh, brilliant.
And I was really quite surprised that the detail that he went into in what was probably a 50 minute conversation.
Yes.
And I thought that was a really honourable thing for him to do, to take time out of his busy schedule to do that. And of course, I bumped into him on many occasions afterwards. Um, Brian Clough, refereeing at Nottingham Forest, the easiest team to referee. He was such a disciplinarian that
He was.
his players got on with the game. You know, when you look for 10 yards, you got it. Rarely, you know, and here was Kenny Burns, Larry Lloyd, and these players,
Yeah,
John
tough up
Robertson,
players.
uh, you know, McNeil, and you look at them and you go, wow, you're on the same field as these guys, and yeah, they were a good team to referee. You know, challenging matches
Definitely.
for sure. Um, Going to Arsenal, and
Mm.
again, here's the story. You know, I've got a midweek game at Arsenal, and I'm leaving the office around about 3 o'clock in Sheffield for a 7:45 kickoff. Um,
Relying
think
on the
about that.
motorways. Yeah, relying
Think
on the
about think
motorways to be
about
clear.
think about the
Oh,
drive, and then round the you know the effectively I went round the North Circle. I knew there was a
oh,
better way of doing it, but you know the pressure, if you like, of getting to the game on time.
indeed. I,
Um, you know, so that work game pressure was there in midweek games for sure.
I would be.
Um,
If you're working during the day,
and
yeah, that's a tough
yeah,
one.
yeah, and you know, going around and refereeing at Anfield on that first occasion, I can
Mm.
remember giving a free kick against Liverpool and Emily News having a real go at me. Um, and eventually me asking him to keep quiet. He was the captain, and then he wouldn't. He went on, and I thought, I'm the young kid on the block here. I've got to make my presence felt. And
You have.
so as a result, I said, right, what's your name? He goes, what? I go, what's your name? He goes, are you kidding? Have you not seen me on television? Question of sport.
Oh,
And I've gone, I still need your name because that was the process there.
yes, of course.
And you know, I'm going Hemling, and he shouts at me, Emlyn, EMLYNUs, and I went, thanks very much. And in fairness, it did me a great favour because he went back and he's telling every player, don't talk to this guy. And so I could hear him saying that to the players, but
Brilliant. Made your afternoon
but
quicker.
Going to Anfield was always a great pleasure. I mean,
Yes.
the fact is, again, great teams, great players. John Barnes, I can remember running down the left wing in the
Oh,
same way that I'd seen Steve Highway run down that left wing.
oh, great players.
And John Barnes, on one occasion, putting the ball in the back of the net from the wing. It was a fantastic goal.
Mm,
And you know, I've refereed many players, the best, the
of course you
Maradonas,
have.
all of those. But my most favourite player was Kenny Dalglish,
Oh, what a player he was
and
too.
and Dalglish for the reason that he was 100% player.
Mm.
Every game I officiated and he played, he would give 100%. And slightly going off cue here, I can remember I'd refereed Juventus, and after the game, the president wanted to see me, and I'm going, no chance. And then the UEFA delegate said, "Look, I'm going to accompany you. The president wants to see you." And I went upstairs, and across the table, he said to me, "How is my favourite player?" And I've gone looking at the players that Juve had at the time. I've gone, is he asking me if there's anything wrong with the players that I've officiated?
Mm.
And I went, well, no player particularly stands out. And he goes, John Charles,
Oh,
you live in Sheffield, that is close to Leeds.
there's
How
it.
is my favourite player?
There's a name
And
to conjure with, John Charles.
and I explained that John Charles sadly had I think declared bankruptcy on a hotel and I didn't know this until the week before. I'd had lunch with a business guy, and I was informed that the hotel had been owned by John Charles, and it sadly had gone belly up. But a week or two later, I got a call from Leeds to say, look, Juve were I'm very keen to play a testimonial match. And that was quickly arranged. And so I had the pleasure of refereeing John Charles's testimonial.
Wow.
He himself wanted that to be John Charles Bobby Collins testimonial. But the reason I tell that story is that Kenny Dalglish that evening played for Leeds United.
Amazing. Good old days of testimonials, Keith.
Yeah.
You don't get these days, because players wouldn't they? They'd switch around for teams. Because I can remember a testimonial match. I'm not sure who it was for now, but it was at Stamford Bridge. And you had Peter Osgood, Alan Hudson, and of course the great Mancunian himself, Irish player himself playing as well. So and that happened as well. Put on a Chelsea strip. You're a true Manchester United player. George Best. George Best, pure Mancunian by football terms. And there he was standing in a Chelsea kit, playing for Chelsea, in a Chelsea player's testimonial with Alan Hudson and Peter Osgood. Great days in those days, weren't they, testimonials?
Well, I was once invited for lunch by Neil Mitchley, said the late Neil Mitchley, to Burnden Park, midweek. No match. And I arrived and thinking Neil was a great after dinner speaker, and I thought this is what was going to take place. But in effect, it was a private lunch. There was no other people, and the table of four. And that table of four was me and Neil Mitchley, Nat Lofthouse, and Sir Tom Finney.
Wow!
And we chatted over lunch, and it was remarkable because we did touch on testimonials.
Yes.
And we got onto a story that they were having a bit of a banter, Finney and Lofthouse with each other. It was clearly a great relationship, partnership of respect. Finney was unhappy. He said, I was unhappy with that game. And Lofthouse said, yeah, you've never forgotten, have you? And I said, well, what went off? Thinking the game itself was a problem. It was at Grimsby for a player. And they said, well, at the end of the match, the fee was a bag of wet fish. Each of us received a bag of wet fish. And Finney
Well, it was Grimsby.
and Finney said, I'd just taken delivery of a Morris Traveller, and he said, and that bag of wet fish, because you didn't stack it properly, leaked all over my car and ruined it. I could never get rid of the smell of fish. And Lofthouse said, well, it was great when we got back because I knocked people up and handed the fish. And he said about an hour later, opened the door. And this must be the early hours of the morning. He said, I could smell the fish being cooked. And I've gone, well, naively, I've gone, why didn't you put it in a fridge? He goes, what? We didn't have fridges then. So here you see the guys who
real life, isn't it?
In that era,
yes,
were and I can recall meeting Sir Stanley Matthews, and in fact, I have somewhere in my collection, not a big collection, a signed red card because Stanley asked me to sign a red card and hand it to him because, of course, red and yellow cards weren't there in his era.
Of course.
And I said, on that basis, you sign my red card. So we did. And I think those are the stories that come around with football.
Absolutely.
That everybody thinks that referees are at war with players. Players show passion on the field of play, and sometimes they'll use the odd expletive that's unacceptable. But generally, there has to be, for the game to exist, I think, respect running through
absolutely
the game as a whole.
I agree. And I think in the early days, there was a lot more respect probably than today, maybe. Maybe I'm wrong. And when you look at Sir Stanley Matthews, I mean, crikey, what a player. Playing for England at 50. I mean, that defies logic, doesn't it, today? I mean, you
It
wouldn't
does.
happen. And what a player. Absolutely
No.
has been.
Yeah, yeah.
But I have to say,
I mean, yeah, yeah. I mean, look, at the end of the day, we know that the very highest level of the professional game, they're earning huge sums of money.
definitely.
You know, when I had that conversation with Stanley Matthews, not with Stanley Matthews, with Tom Finney and Nat Lofthouse, it was the maximum was £7.
Yes.
And you know, they might get a quid put in the boot if they've scored a goal,
Yes.
you know, or they've received a win. A few extra shillings is what they said.
Yeah.
So, you know, Finney was a plumber by profession. So it puts it in perspective how the game has accelerated,
Oh,
as life
hugely.
has in a sense,
Yes.
into the multi-million-pound business that it is today.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And of course, I was going to say this because I was hoping you'd bring it up, but one Premier League match does stand out in my memory, I have to say, which you officiated as the match referee in the 1990-91 Premier League encounter between Manchester United and Arsenal at Old Trafford, a match notorious for the 21-man brawl breaking out just after the hour mark, I think it was.
Yeah.
The melee resulted in Arsenal being docked 2 points and Manchester United 1 point by the Football Association upon a 3-hour consultation with yourself, Keith, and your match officials. A tough experience, needing all your skills and your strength to manage. What do you remember about this incident, Keith? And of course, being the man in the middle, expected to deal with the problem in a timely and, of course, professional and assuring manner.
I think, first of all, I was, as a 6-footer,
Yes.
Physically, I'm going to stop it. It came out of nothing, or
Yes.
it appeared to come out of nothing. And it shows how refereeing has moved on, because from that day, you learn to do your homework. Had
Yes.
I done my own work, I would have kept an eye on a couple of players because there was some history. I was informed afterwards. But it blew up and it lasted about 16 seconds when you look at the video. It seemed an age at the time.
It did.
The only thing that I said to myself was, which one am I going to send off? There was no process and procedure. I mean, I helped to create that afterwards. But in reality, my thinking was, if I'm going to be fair here, it's either 21 or none.
Mm.
And I know that sounds daft, but that was my thinking. And
Well,
so it had calmed down. I got on with the game. But what I knew I had to do, and I informed both managers after the match, that I was going to produce a very detailed report on the situation, explaining that there hadn't been a massive problem in the lead up to it. It was a complete and utter surprise. And
yes.
I think that both clubs and the panel that were doing the sort of disciplinary panel that were doing the trial went into it in considerable detail. After I'd given my information, that was it. I left. I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. It was later that we were informed that points had been docked. And apart from the problems related to finance now, no teams have been deducted points up to that point and since, apart
Absolutely.
from the Everton scenario at the moment. But so the FA were getting concerned about the reactions of mass confrontation. And I think that they wanted to send a message out that, hey, this is unacceptable. From my point of view, I started discussing with other referees at that time what would be I was the training officer of the Association of Premier League and Football League linesmen. And I wanted to debate and saying, well, how can we actually avoid this in the future? Or how can we deal with it better on the field? And out of which we have a mass confrontation process. We know now that if there is such a thing,
Yes.
that the assistants will come on the field of play and they'll observe And then I will go through any red cards that I may have. I'll then ask either assistant, have they got any red cards?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll do my yellows and then ask the assistants if they've got any yellows. And I think that the 1996 League Cup final, of which it was the Carling Cup final, of which Howard Webb was the manager. And I think this particular incident in the 90th minute, where he had a mass confrontation, where eventually 3 red cards were issued, the managers were shipped off the field of play prior to that, and yellow cards afterwards, I think demonstrated that the process worked efficiently.
Yes.
And Howard Webb, who was the referee on that particular match, officiated brilliantly and
Absolutely.
dealt with that problem as good as any referee I'd seen.
I mean, your decision making there as well. If you send off one player, you've got to send off 11. It takes me back a little bit to the 1974 British Lions tour of South Africa, when the British Lions were playing out there. And the British Lions, of course, as a rugby team, were known to be very vicious, big, strong lads. And of course, the British Lions developed the 99 call. I don't know if you remember it. And their basis was that if the 99 gets called, every British Lion player has to turn to their nearest South African and basically put them on the deck, hit them.
Yeah.
Which happened. And they worked on the basis that if they do it, they're not going to send all the players off, like yourself, you're thinking here as well. So the game will go on, which happened. And England, well, the British Lions won the tour 3-1. Fantastic. So similar thinking, really, in a way.
Yeah, I think the important thing is it's not a reflection of weak refereeing, because it's easy. Look, it's easy to send a player off. It's more difficult at times to keep them on. So, we're going into the realms of, and sometimes I have this debate. Throughout my career, I refereed at grassroots level. So even if I had a Football League game or a Premier League game or international match, the following weekend, if I hadn't got a game, I would be refereeing in local parks. And I think that kept me grounded. Sometimes I'd be accused at grassroots of people saying, look, this is not a cup final. And I used to respond and say, look, every game for me is a cup final. I want to give them my best, no matter what level of the game it is. And I think this is where, when we look at the FA Cup for referees, particularly those early rounds, the third round in particular, where you've probably got a non-league or a low-level Football League team playing a top-level game, it's so important that you might, at the Premier League level, or Football League One, know the players by Christian name and refer to them as that. But when you get into this non-league, league, or bottom of the league or lower down non-league, then you've got to address everybody the same.
You have.
Otherwise, the non-league team or lower league team might think that you get favouring those guys at the top. So this is the type of psychology and thinking that you have to put through.
Absolutely right, and you're quite right in saying so as well. Fairness across the board is absolutely correct, as we know. It's the only way you can officiate at that level. But of course, before we talk about your roles and interests in retirement, which we'll come on to, we must have a little chat about VAR, your favourite subject and everybody's. I know you talk about VAR quite consistently on social media, as amongst other football areas of conversation. So what do you think VAR has done to the game at the moment, game of football at the moment, Keith? Of course, before you answer, of course, VAR was initially was conceived, of course, by the Royal Netherlands Football Association and came into play in 2018, but of course, influenced by Pierluigi Collina, the referee with VAR in his eyes, as they may say, because he was a fantastic referee, wasn't he? Inspirational.
Yes, he was.
And what a referee Collina was, Keith. What's your view to VAR now? I mean, when it came in, I thought it came in for some right reasons, but it seems to have gone off in a different direction now and kind of ruining the game in my eyes. What's your view?
I think it's disrupting the game, but I want to step back slightly, if I may.
Okay, of course you can.
Because I want to make it clear that I'm for technology. To bring balance into the game. We've got to recognise that the Premier League games are covered by a minimum of 22 cameras.
Absolutely right.
And therefore, if we go back to that earlier statement that to see, recognize, think, and act, often the television cameras see what the referee does not.
Correct.
So that's the basis on which technology has to come in. The
Mm.
first piece of technology that, when I retired from football, I might be jumping the gun, was the communication kits. I went to Twickenham, listened in, and immediately said, "We've got to have these. We've got to
Oh,
have this same system. It's a no-brainer."
it is.
And in fairness, then the chief executive, Richard Scudamore of the Premier League, supported that decision. We went out and purchased them, and that, if you like, improved the teamwork between the assistants and the referees,
Mm.
and the communication ability of working together as a much tighter knit team.
I quite agree, and I
Um,
fully support that. In fact, I would also go as far as to say that I'd like to see, like doing rugby, that the referee is heard in the audience, in the crowd.
yeah, well, we'll move on to that because I think I have views on
Oh, I'm sure
what
you
I
do.
think
That's why I
what I
mentioned
think
it.
needs to be done, and that is preempting what I think in terms of communication. I think that I entirely agree that the process, as we see in rugby union,
Yes.
as we saw in the World Cup with Wayne Barnes, a brilliant communicator before that, previous World Cup final referees, Nigel Owens, the process of using the big screen, the TMO, is one that is open, transparent, very informative, very educational, and shows the courage of a referee who sends off the captain of New Zealand. And then their process is much quicker because they
Indeed.
they then go to this disciplinary panel who whilst Wayne Barnes is still officiating, upgrade it to a red. That is in itself quite an amazing sort of feature that's been introduced into that game that I think puts additional pressure on the match referee on during the course of the match. But that's another point. So we brought the communication kits in, and that actually was beneficial to an improvement of the decision making process. Um, when I became the boss of the PGMOL, I'm jumping ahead a little bit before I
That's
get
okay.
far, but when I became the boss, I was sat at Old Trafford in a game between Manchester United and Tottenham Hotspur,
Mm.
and the ball had been cleared upfield by Manchester United. And Mark Clattenburg, in a really good halfway line approx position, with the movement of play, and the assistant referee who monitors the second rearmost defender, the defence has come out, Manchester United defence is out. What we then had was a snapshot of the Manchester United goal, Roy Carroll dropping it over the line.
Mm.
I could see that, and most people could see that in the crowd, but not afforded to the referee or the assistant. They were neither in a position to judge. So that summer, with Tottenham losing the game and losing, I think, the position as far as UEFA tournament is concerned, I was mindful that this was a massive penalty to pay,
Mm.
and it was the vulnerable area of officiating. So at that point, I went to a summer conference of the Premier League at Leicester, and I was asked, given blue sky thinking, what would I introduce to the game? And I, at that point, said goal line technology. And fortunately, those people in the room, the owners of clubs in some instances, CEOs of clubs, certainly secretaries of clubs, they supported that. And Fulham played a major part
Mm.
with allowing us to use Motspur Park as the basis area in which we could develop the product technically. Moving on, I have to say that process took, within a matter of a year, we got the system operating. The discussions I had with Dr. Paul Hawkins was about the speed at which you got the decision, and we got that down to a very finite amount of time. We did that because we finished up with 7 high-speed cameras, 500 frames per second around each goal, and a signal to the watch that the ball had crossed over the line. Nothing else.
Yes.
I didn't want any verbal conversation, human being to human being. I want the system to say goal over the line.
Yep.
So that's one of the points that I want to make. That system works because I think there was a lot of serious thinking about it. There was Mike Foster, who was the director of the Premier League, a former player of some quality, involved in that process. And I think that the 2 or 3 of us and David Dean, the former director of Arsenal, also heavily committed to supporting that introduction. And he worked tirelessly to get Blatter to change his mind. That process has worked and worked very efficiently. Now we move to VAR. Technically, I believe there's a shortfall. I believe that shortfall is the speed of the cameras that are used, which is broadcast cameras, to determine whether a player is in an offside position at the time the ball is kicked. It's not an easy process because the player in an offside position has not committed an offence.
Exactly.
He only commits an offence if he becomes active and is interfering with play, gaining an advantage or whatever. So when I look at broadcast speeds and the technical equipment used, I think it's flawed to determine that a toe is offside. So I want to make that point. Nobody has proven to me that the system itself is good enough. That is why I'm amazed that the Premier League did not adopt the semi-automated offside system.
Yeah.
Explaining this, it has its own camera system, so it can go to 500 frames per second. It uses AI by putting datum points on every player, and the movement of that and the tracking movement of that player is sent back 50 times a second. 50 times a second it goes back into the system.
Yes.
The ball itself, and this is probably one of the reasons why the semi-automated system in the Premier League has not been adopted at the moment, is because the ball used at the World Cup is Adidas. And inside that ball is a microchip.
That's right, there is.
And as a result, that detects when it's that's when it detects when it's kicked and the outcome. Obviously, it's semi-automated because there's this decision to be made about whether the player's active or interfering with play and all the complications of that.
Yes.
So that side of it is great. The delivery, I think anybody who delivers at the moment who states that they're happy with VAR in our game in the Premier League, and I'll talk about the Premier League more than any other, must be a fool. Because there's no doubt it's interfering with the entertainment value of the fans. That's the first thing. And that's because the fan is treated like a mushroom, not involved in the process. That underpins what you stated earlier, the need for transparency in the communication of the process. We now have Howard Webb in, he's been in a year. I think he's the right person for the job. I think he's got a massive, he's in a difficult position because he's inherited the management team and coaching team set up by Mike Riley.
Yes.
And bluntly, I can't say any more, that setup failed. And I've seen and witnessed the decline in refereeing standards. So if we say VAR is there to help referee, which it is, and we've got declining standards of officiating, the two are clashing, and we're not seeing any form of real improvement. So offsides I'm not buying into it. I don't think it's accurate enough. Until they get the semi-automated system, we'll still have judgments made that are inaccurate because that's human beings. They and the law and you know
Exactly
the
right.
law equally is as difficult as it is for referees. So I'm not suggesting that it's easy, and too many decisions are subjective, and too many laws, handball and offside in particular, have been overcomplicated.
Oh, dreadfully, yeah.
So, so now we get the role of VAR and referee and assistant referee. Let's talk about the assistant referee. I think his role's been diminished.
I think so too.
I think that when I left, we had, and we've had for a number of years, even prior to me taking the PGML role on, we've had excellent assistant referees. We've got a great reputation. Phil Sharp, Glenn Turner, um, you know, and others. Dave Babsky, Mike Malarkey. These are guys who've refereed at the highest level in the World Cup finals.
Yeah.
Um, and their judgment offside, I have to say, even when I was boss and I was using Prozone and other system and judging and looking at videos of their decisions, I was in awe. I never ever got anywhere near the quality of their decision making, their movement profile up the line, flagging technique, all those things from an assistant refereeing point of view have improved, and they've improved since we determined that assistant referees would be assistant referees only. The negative side of that decision, because I was part of that, is that I believe some of those assistant referees who've remained assistant referees would have gone on to make outstanding referees. So, in a way, that I think has contributed to some of the decline in standards because, you know, in my era, I ran the line for 3 years, became a referee. So,
yes, you came through the system in that way, and of course, it's conceivable as well, highly conceivable, that VAR, these 3 or so virtual assistant referees sat in a studio halfway around the world, potentially, could actually referee a game without any physical presence on the field of play. So referees as well as assistant referees could eventually drift out of the game. That's conceivable, isn't it?
well, I think that not at the moment the way VAR is operating. If I'm honest, ultimately, I think one of the problems we've got. It's easy to call out problems, isn't it?
It is.
Actually, what you have to do is actually say, look, what's your view in relation to remedies? I think that there's a very clear remedy in terms of VAR, and that is you have VAR specialists, and that's all they do. They are VAR week in, week out, because the more you do it, the better you become. And therefore, I think that, you know, I don't see how it's going to work having a VAR operator one day and that VAR operator referees in the middle the following day,
Yes.
particularly if the game's not gone well, because
Exactly.
you're then carrying psychological baggage into your next game. You want to go into a game confident, away from any previous interference, and with a clear mind to justify that level of performance. You need also to be informed. You know, the games that you're officiating, you're refereeing at the top level.
Exactly.
So I think it's pretty obvious to me that VAR should operate as a VAR specialist only, and that's the role that they do. Whoever that panel is, obviously, ex-referees, ex-assistant referees, and maybe other people could be uh, chosen, selected, but there also has to be a performance level that is achieved, accuracy and all that goes with it. So I think that is the move that I think needs to be made sooner rather than later. And I think that then might help the process further. I'd go perhaps one step further. Recently, they spent £1 million on Stockley Park. It all looks a bit comfortable.
Yes.
Yes, it's modern and you're dealing with technical equipment, but I just think, you know, are they going into the game with the same sort of excitement, butterflies in the stomach,
Yes.
whatever the game is. My belief, therefore, is they're not. It's an assumption. So I would go one step further and I would say, right, what I want is I want a room in every stadium to be the VAR room in that stadium. I want the referee and the VAR operator to arrive in the same team bus, to be in the same hotel the night before, to chat. I want the referee to be able to talk to the VAR at half time. And that's certainly post match.
Yes.
And if there's something that the manager is questioning on a decision, so if we look at, okay, I'm going immediate. If we look at Sheffield, I'm from Sheffield, so let's look at that Sheffield United Liverpool game yesterday. So I'm that fresh to an incident. I'm a Sheffield Wednesday fan, by the way, so I'm not a Blade.
Okay.
But I believe there was no justification for allowing Liverpool's second goal because there was a foul challenge
There was
that
actually. I
was
noticed that.
reckless,
Mm.
that warranted a yellow card. So we have Simon Hooper, referee, and we have, if it follows suit in terms of what was announced by appointments, we have Michael Oliver in the VAR room. So I would want to know, if I'm their boss, how they came to that decision when VAR is in operation.
Mm-hmm.
Did Simon Hooper have a clear view? If he didn't, then Michael Oliver, who I rate as our number one referee,
Mm.
uh, then why didn't Michael Oliver as VAR come in? And I think it's my belief that I believe that the sort of butterflies in the stomach are not the same when you're a VAR operator. And I just wonder whether concentration has drifted out of both referees, Hooper. And then I look and think, just a
It's a
minute.
fair point, actually, Keith, to be fair. It's a very fair point you're making.
And then I look at the assistant referee who's close by, um, on that far wing. And I think to myself, well, he's had a view on this. Has he had anything to say? No flag.
Yes.
So you've got three officials. Okay, one's in a room looking at a television screen, but they're in close proximity. Michael Oliver's got the ability to be able to replay it. I
Yes.
praised him as our number one referee, and he is our number one referee. He's highly regarded. He's challenged by Anthony Taylor. And the reason behind that is they've both been to the World Cup. These are not idiot referees. These are referees recognised around the world as top
Yes.
quality. There's a gap between them and the others. Although, I think John Brooks had a good game last night. He refereed quite well. And I think that, Rob Jones at the weekend had a very good game. So we're beginning to see some referees performing and gaining. But I look at that, and yes, VAR became, if you like, the Achilles heel to that game.
Yes, he probably did, actually.
And as fans, we suddenly say, well, we go away. And however Liverpool fans will be irate with what I'm saying, no doubt, that listening, the fact is that we didn't get the right decision. And that's what referees about, the correct application of law.
Right.
And then, of course, we had in the Brentford game, I think it was, that incident with Gilmore. I think he might have been on the receiving end, but there was a slap. That's a red card offence.
Yes, without doubt.
So there we are. I have to tell you, when I was boss of the PGMOL, 10 games, remember I was also boss of the Football League referees, but we had 10 games in the Premier League, and my aim was to say, I want to go through 10 games without a key major incident. Rarely did we achieve that. Rarely. We had one error, what I considered an error, almost every 10 games. One every 10 games.
Yep.
We're getting two or three. There was arguments about a penalty kick last night in that Sheffield United game. Yeah, I mean, you look at it and you say, VAR is supposed to smooth out this. We know it's not going to be 100%. But if anybody says to me that officiating at the moment is in the 90s, I would dispute that. They come up with facts. The facts they usually come up with is we're 97, 98% accurate.
Yep.
And then I go, well, let's take out the goal kicks and the corner kick decisions. Let's take out the nominal free kicks. Let's just get to the key major incidents, the penalty
absolutely.
kicks and the red cards. Let's look at those. How many of those did we get right and how many have we got wrong? Yeah. What is that percentage?
That makes an awful lot of sense, doesn't it, really? Key moments in matches, not losing all this time worrying about some of these innocuous incidents. Let the referee deal with it on the pitch. Because the referee certainly is being overridden at the moment. And I think actually when you look at some of these Premier League matches and the referee, they need to stand up to VAR in a way and actually call their own decision. Because VAR, get called up to the screen on the side of the pitch. That they're going to follow the VAR decision. And if they don't agree with it, they should say, no, I'm sticking with my decision, because they're being overridden, aren't they, really, referees now on the park?
I wrote in the Daily Telegraph some weeks ago, it upset a lot of referees, but I'll always say as it is. I said that we're developing a group of lazy referees.
Yes.
And I think that laziness comes from the fact that, if you've got passion, and I'm sure they've got passion, and they work hard at the fitness levels. And I think since Howard Webb's come in, I think the fitness levels have improved. I think the mobility around the field of play is much more dynamic than it used to be. I think it's getting towards what Howard himself used to demonstrate week in, week out, like Clattenburg and Halsey. They were sprinters.
They were.
There was the Jeff Winter of this world who was mobile without question. He could get up and down the pitch, but his game reading was brilliant.
Yes,
he got into positions, and you used to say to yourself, "How did he get there?" Because he had dynamic cognitive skills. He read the game brilliantly, and I used to watch his games, go and watch as the guy in the stand, as his boss, and I used to think, look, and all of a sudden he's there, and you used to go, he must have thought about that. They developed that skill set. And that's why I think those sort of people like the Halses and everybody else should be involved helping Howard to improve the standard of officiating, because those skill sets were lost, I think, when Mike Riley took over and decided to get rid of assessors and move people on of the quality of Paul Durkheim and Roger Dilks and others that were then key coaches. But that's history now. But I do think that when you look at the current middle management structure of an organisation that's grown out of all proportion as to when I was boss, we had few numbers. We worked with a turnover of 5 million. That turnover now is 26 million. And there's an awful lot of managers around the place twiddling the thumbs and not delivering. So I'm mindful of what I'm saying, but I do think genuinely, looking out now, looking in, and listening to what other people say, and listening to quality journalists expressing concerns about standard of officiating, and certainly there's lots of journalists who I know would like VAR binned tomorrow.
There's lots of supporters that would too, of course, but we're in this position where we are with VAR. It's a very emotive subject, as we know. And I'm hoping it will be resolved in the future months, not years, to be more of an effective system. Let's see what happens. And I hope that you can, Keith, as a person, as a great referee, help to educate and help to push that forward into a better system for the good of football. Because you can see it destroying football at the moment. You really can. And it's not what it's put in for, was it? But it's just, it's the way it is. I'm I'm conscious of time as well here, but part of your retirement, you also work to promote knowledge of refereeing. I think you've mentioned it earlier on a little bit via several publications. And in doing so, you published your own book, Hackett's Law, a referee's notebook in 1986. This is one of two books, Keith, that I'm aware of that you've written. So what does this book convey, apart from the obvious, of course? And where can the show's listeners get a copy? How to promote the sales of your book on the show.
Well, I mean, I think copies might still be available. But
Yes.
Hackett's Law was based upon giving an insight, if you like, mainly to refereeing in a slightly amusing way of the build up to a cup final, what it entails. And it was produced by Collins Willow many years ago, and I think it certainly doesn't track my career. It talks about various things.
Yes.
My visit in America, etc. I think the books that really have counted are the ones that I've produced with Paul Trevillion, the artist. You Are the Ref. In '81, I got a call from a guy called Paul Stewart, and
that's funny. That's my next question, actually.
and he was the editor of Shoot magazine, and
yes.
And he said, "Would you like to do the answers for Shoot magazine? And we'll pay you the current match fee of a referee for each publication."
Wow, that's
and
good.
I'm gonna link you with artist Paul Trevillion. And I started doing it. Well, I had a look, bought a few copies, and at that time, two people had been involved and giving the answers, and the current guy was Clive Thomas.
Yes.
And so I thought, well, obviously, where's Clive going? And he said, well, he doesn't want to do it anymore. And I went, well, okay, then fine, I'll take it on. And it was interesting because what you get is you get a phone call from Paul who'd say, here are the three questions. You give me the answers.
Yes.
And so that's how it operated. It was give the answers, and then the strip would appear in the Shoot magazine.
And the Guardian as well, I understand.
Well, it moved from the Shoot magazine after its demise to the Guardian. We did that for a number of years, and the Guardian had a publishing arm, and out of which then we produced several books. And I'm looking for one. Bear me. I'm sorry. Apologies for going off the screen.
Oh no, you're okay. You carry on, Keith.
But so Trevillion had this wonderful ability to draw people.
Oh, good book, beautiful book.
Yeah. So what you had was almost like each week you had a player that he drew, and you look at the players.
You Are the Ref, the name of the show,
and so they have the book, and I think we've done 3 of those, and then a 4th, which is You Are the Ref, a guide to refereeing. And this was me just doing a coaching manual with Bloomsbury's.
Yes.
A5 specific for referees.
I mean, you also worked on a few occasions with Paul Trevillion, didn't you, Keith? And I think going back 2007, you also produced a DVD-ROM, which the younger listeners will say, what on earth's a DVD-ROM? Old technology now, of course, called the Referee Academy for use in the training of match officials, which was sanctioned, of course, by the FA, Football League and the Premier League. So there's quite a few pieces you've done with Paul Trevillion. Sounds like a really decent chap. Good man.
Well, I mean, if you ever get him on the show, you'll find him extremely interesting.
Yes.
His history.
You help get him on the show for me, Keith.
Well, I'll do that. His history in the game is remarkable. As an artist, phenomenal. If you remember, well, you may not, but way back at Leeds United, they had stocking tags. It was Paul's idea that to try and improve the relationship of players with the fans at Leeds United, the players would have their numbers on tags, and then they would throw those into the crowd as gifts for the supporters, all aimed at making life much closer between fan and player.
Good idea.
He did a Snickers ad with Pele. He's not only, he covers all sports. The facts are that he's got some wonderful drawings of David Gower. I've got on the wall Ricky Hatton that he drew. So yeah, he's a sports illustrator. He's worked with Tiger Woods and Jack Nicklaus and various other people. So he's got a fantastic record in sport. Belies his age really because he's now I think well into his 80s. He's easy to work with,
Yeah, fantastic.
and
Nice.
as a result of that, the books and my work has become very very easy. We did the Walk of Fame at Manton National Football Museum. When they opened that, there was a Walk of Fame that he did, plaques of the big players, and yeah, super artist. And you are
Looks
the
like
ref.
it.
And in fact, we talked a few months ago because both of us have sort of had people come on and say, "When's the next one?"
Absolutely.
He's a busy guy, and I think that
A
I'm quite
talented
happy to
guy.
do another one.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
down to Paul.
It's
Yeah.
very talented as well. And you also, as a columnist, you wrote for courtoffside.com, I believe, but you don't do that now. I think Mark Housey, he occupies the referee's columnist spot on Court Offside, from I've read and understood. So
Yeah.
bit of an author too. Keith is not just a ref. Writing capabilities, skills. I mean, author is a great art anyway, isn't it? Writing's lovely. I really do enjoy writing myself. Obviously, that's my
Yes.
book and so on my way. But wonderful. So, what else occupies you these days, Keith? Outside of football, is there any other occupation? Writing, of course.
Well, I think I spent an interesting day this week at the University in Manchester, UCFB, and
Yes,
talked to future journalists, commentators, if you like,
yes,
about the world of refereeing. And I think I've done several podcasts with students who are going for master's degrees and degrees in sport.
yes.
I also am in regular contact with young referees around the world who come on various sort of podcasts or Zoom
Absolutely.
links talking about and trying to advise them on refereeing. After I retired from the PGMOL, and Mike Riley took over, I retired on the basis that they wanted me to become the referee ambassador for the Premier League. So
Yes.
I actually spent a number of years as that in that role, Premier Skills, going to Asia, Africa, South America,
Bit of
running
travel.
workshops,
Wonderful. What a good
and
job.
yeah, I mean, and great because I that was when I was boss of the PGMOL. I brought in a system with Australia and New Zealand that we had
Mm,
a one-way system that their referees would come to England. They'd spend a week or more with our Premier League referees, get to know them well, do a reserve game uh, locally around the country to
mm.
where they were being hoteled, and we've seen referees like Chris Beath, who refereed at the World Cup, Jared Gillett, who's now refereeing on the Premier League, and others from New Zealand go on to referee. Peter O'Leary go on and referee World Cup, and more recently Elvis Nupu, who's from Cameroon. He came out of a township in Cameroon, didn't know much about refereeing, attended one of the Premier Skills courses. This is funded by the Premier League, and we spent a week coaching them to become referees. And Elvis was an assistant referee at the last World Cup. So
Fantastic.
those are the sort of things that I get involved with. Obviously, I write for the Daily Telegraph on a fairly regular basis.
Yes. The author in
Uh,
Keith, the author that is Keith Hackett these days.
yeah,
Congratulations. It's brilliant.
yeah.
That's good
So
to
I
see.
get involved. I mean, I think football and refereeing, football in itself is a disease that we all catch. and we can
So,
never.
yes.
There's no injection against it.
No.
There's the frustrations of our team not doing very well. Um, I'm president of the Northern Counties East League,
Mhm.
which I'm really honoured to have been selected. And interestingly, the vice president of that is Howard Webb.
Oh, wow.
Uh, when Howard went to America, I replaced him because he'd been a former president of that league. I'm also president of Penistone Church FC, and we are a club just north of Sheffield. We have somewhere around about 30 teams,
Mm,
and we play at all levels, both
it's good.
genders, and promote football in the community. And it's a true community club.
Yes.
It's got a buoyant thing. We have that difficulty, like most clubs, ensuring that we get the funds, trying to improve the facilities for kids. We'd love to have a 3G pitch. We've got to find 200K, I think, to be able to achieve that. That
Mm,
would then mean that all the teams at the moment, a lot of our teams are training at other venues, which takes us away a little bit from the club spirit that we want to gender. But the majority of our sponsors are people who have businesses in and around Penistone,
mm.
and they attend games. So we're very fortunate in that way.
Very fortunate indeed, Keith. You've had a rich, rich life in football and
Mm.
refereeing. And of course, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. There was an awful lot more we could have talked about. And actually, I've got some questions I've had to cut out because time has just disappeared looking at the clock. Um, but that's life, I guess. And there's a lot more we could talk about too. So, as always on the World of Lord Russell podcast talk show, Keith, we could talk forever about your life as a former international and Premier League football referee and other interests too, of course, too, particularly around your authoring skills and what you do in terms of the writing capabilities too. It's quite amazing. So thank you, Keith, for coming onto the show and talking about your
Pleasure.
professional life in football. It's been a huge pleasure as always. And as always, the pleasure is all mine. And of course, the show's audience when this podcast is released on the World of Lord Russell podcast show. So thank you, Keith. Ladies and gentlemen,
Pleasure.
I'll give you Keith Hackett a big round of applause. Most of you there, of course, I clap my hands. Thank you very much, Keith. It's been fantastic. It's been an enjoyable chat, I have to say. Absolutely fantastic. Time has flown. But do hang on if you can, just for a few moments. I'll just close up, Keith, and
Yeah,
have a
sure.
quick chat afterwards. The next episode on the World of Lord Russell podcast talk show is the 6 times world snooker champion, where my special guest will be Steve Davis, the former professional snooker player who is currently a snooker commentator, DJ, and electronic musician, and of course, author. Steve is best known for dominating professional snooker during the 1980s, where he reached 8 World Snooker Championship finals in 9 years, winning 6 world titles, and Steve held the world #1 ranking for 7 consecutive seasons. Steve was runner-up to Dennis Taylor in one of snooker's most famous matches, the 1985 World Championship final, whose dramatic black ball conclusion, and known as the Black Ball Final, attracted 18.5 million viewers, still the largest British television audience for any broadcast after midnight and any broadcast on BBC Two. In addition to Steve's 6 world titles, Steve won the UK Championship 6 times and the Masters 3 times for a total of 15 Triple Crown titles, placed him behind only Ronnie O'Sullivan on 22, who's just won the UK Championships, of course, for I think the 7th time, and Stephen Hendry on 18. And of course, I'm looking forward to seeing you all on the inside. So until then, it's au revoir from him and au revoir from me.